Welcome, guys. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name's Luke Stuber, and myself and Jason Stoller will be presenting this next session. It's titled, What's Next? If you think about it, on your operation, or on my operation, I actually farm here in the Tremont area as well as work here. On a good year, my planter covers each acre one time. That's my goal. I don't want to go in and replant. But that same acre, I'm covering anywhere from 3 to 5 times with my sprayer. It gives me a lot of opportunities to do a good job spraying. It also gives me a lot of opportunities to do a poor job spraying. Over the last few years here at Precision Planting, we've really been trying to brainstorm where is the right opportunities for precision planting. What value can we bring? What technology can we add to the sprayer? So it was actually 3 years ago, myself, Jason, and a number of the other guys here from Precision Planting went out, took a class, became certified commercial applicators in the state of Illinois. We then called up AGCO, we borrowed a Rogator sprayer, and we went out and bought a John Deere. And then we called area farmers and we started spraying for them. We wanted to cover a lot of acres and a lot of different types of machines to experience the good, the bad. Where could we improve? And we progressed from there. We started bringing in Hagies and Patriots, and we went through these sprayers and saying, what could we improve? Where are the opportunities? We also spent time in the field on the ground looking at spray cards. What is your droplet size? How does boom height affect that? What about the stability of your boom, your travel speed, wind speed? We tried to look at holistically the whole aspect of spraying. And from that data set, we sat down, we started brainstorming, okay, here's what we've learned. And we generated a large list of potential projects. Here's the areas that we thought that we could improve the aspect of spraying, or the sprayer pass. You've already heard Justin kind of touch on the first two with reclaim and vision-based steering. And really what we want to focus on in this session is these next three. If you think about turn compensation, every time you turn with your sprayer, the inside tip over applies, the outside tip under applies. How could we improve that? How about swath? Most newer sprayers have swath control, but is there a better way? Could we do a better job? And then the third one's pressure control. And this one is one that some guys understand, some don't. But if you think about every time you change speed in your field, your rate changes, which means your pressure changes. Could we provide a better way to provide you more consistent spray pressure through your field? And as we started looking at these, we realized that in order for us to do this, we needed to take control of the physical aspect of spraying. We needed to control the pump. We needed to control the nozzle. And so with that, I would like to introduce to you today Symphony. So what is Symphony? Symphony is a precision planting designed and controlled PWM nozzle system. It takes the Gen 3 2020, provides a new user interface designed specifically for the sprayer. There's a new electrical architecture designed specifically for the sprayer. And at the heart of the system is a custom nozzle body with an integrated solenoid. And that integrated solenoid what gives us the ability to control spray at a nozzle level. One thing I want to point out is our new electrical architecture is designed for Symphony, but it's also being designed much like the SRM system. Once you have this base electrical architecture, you're ready for Symphony. You're also ready for future projects that we're actively working on. We're designing it with expansion capability in mind. So we think about those three things we talked about earlier, turn compensation, swath, and pressure control. How does having the ability to control the nozzle solve those? So if we start with turn comp, if you think about this, every time you turn, you have too much spray on the inside, too little on the outside. And think about it, if we can control that nozzle, can we now reduce the flow on the inside and increase the flow on the outside? And the answer is yes. But one thing, as we started getting into this, we wanted to say, hey, how bad is this problem? Most guys realize it exists, but it's hard to actually visualize on a sprayer. On a planter, it's pretty easy to count that you've got extra plants on the inside, too few on the outside. But on a sprayer, once you spray, within minutes, that spray somewhat evaporates or dries up, and you don't even see the effects on the ground. And so a lot of guys are saying, hey, I don't really have this problem. And so we actually, 2 years ago, we set up a series of tests just to help prove this out to ourselves, where we went in with a sprayer and we sprayed semicircles with and without turn comp. We sprayed a field of beans. We sprayed them with Cobra. Now, Cobra will not kill the beans, but it will burn them or damage them. And then we flew those fields with a drone to monitor crop damage for the next couple of weeks. And here's what we saw. So if we look at our first pass, no turn compensation. So based on the tightness of our turn, the size of our booms, we were about a 2x rate on the inside. We're at a nominal rate in the middle, and we're at a half rate on the outside. So our spray varied by 250% from the inside to the outside. What did we see? If we look at that inside, we got a dark red. That's a significant amount of crop damage. We actually almost killed the beans with Cobra in that area because we applied a 2x rate. In the middle, you see some kind of, call it light red. That's our nominal rate. That's the amount of damage that we expected to see. If we go all the way to the outside, it's a light green to a yellow color. In fact, when you visually went and looked at the crop, you really didn't see that much damage in this area because we were at a half rate. If you contrast that with where we enabled turn compensation, so now with your Symphony system, you can decrease the flow on the inside, increase the flow on the outside, and what do we see? We see that nice even burn all the way through that pass that matches the burn of the nominal rate on the no turn compensation slide. So now with Symphony, we can get an even distribution of spray across your boom when you're taking a turn. And so how does this look in the actual field? That's an example, but what about a real field? So this is actually one of my fields about 4 miles down the road from here. It's a terrace field. We've got a timber edge. I'm actually in the sprayer the day we took this drone shot, and as I'm going through that middle terrace, how good of a job do I do? So I've got 120-foot wide booms. As I take that turn, it's a 400-foot diameter turn. I have about a 50% variation from my inside tip to the outside tip, where I'm over-applying on that inside, under-applying on the outside. 50%, that's not great, but what about if I go up by that timber point? When I'm outlining that timber edge, I don't square them off. I basically come up the edge, whip around, and head back down the other side. If I do the math, I've got a 240% difference in spray volume from my inside to the outside because of the tightness of that turn. The thing that really worries me when I start looking at these situations is actually where I'm under-applying chemical. I would never intentionally go in and spray a half rate or even a reduced rate of 20% in a given field. Locally here, herbicide resistance is becoming a big deal. We don't kill weeds like we did a few years ago. It takes more spray, more passes, more chemistries to get the job done. And by putting down this half rate, I'm just exacerbating the problem. And I'm doing it in the same areas of my field every year. You could say, hey, I don't farm any fields like this, but do you farm fields that have waterways that you outline that wind through the field? And do you, when you come to the end of that waterway, do you whip on around? Or even I find myself when I'm spraying a square field, as I'm approaching that corner, I tend to pull my left boom tip around as I swing around that corner and then back up and use swath control to fill in that back triangle. But when I whip that boom around, there is a portion of each of those corners where I put down about a half rate if I do the math. And that worries me moving forward because if I start thinking about this, those are areas of the field that I've got to go in and routinely get the hoe out to try to clean things up, or we come back and make another pass around the outside to clean things up. So I would challenge you to start looking at your fields, think through how often am I doing this? How often am I making a turn where I'm either under or over applying? And is there a better way? And Symphony can help you do that. So the next one's swath. If you think about a modern swath system, you have somewhere between 5 and 11 sections, which gives you in that 15 to 20 foot wide for swath. And I would say that solves the majority of the swath problem. But how about your waterways? If you think about it, you still outline them, and why do you do that? It's because the swath sections that's 15 to 20 feet wide is too wide to hit an angled waterway and not kill it as you cross it. What if now that 15 or 20 foot wide swath section becomes 15 or 20 inches wide? We now have a solenoid on every nozzle. So now we have the ability to turn off each nozzle. So your nozzle spacing can now be your swath size. So if you have 15-inch wide nozzles, that's your swath section. It's 15 inches. So you now have the ability, if you want to go in and outline your waterways, create an internal boundary, and start thinking about spraying right across them. Because that swath section gets small enough that we can control to that boundary. The other thing is, you think about total overlap in a given field. The original systems or the systems out there today are 1% to 2%. You're essentially down to 0. So you get a little bit of product savings along with this. But the big one is time. You now have the ability to just go in, outline those waterways, and spray across them. So as we've met with growers, talked through this, swath and turn compensation are two things that are well understood. Everybody knows the problem exists, and it's pretty easy to understand how you help solve them. The one that's not well understood is pressure control. And so if you think about your sprayer today, what do you have control over? And it's the pump. So you set a rate, and depending on your travel speed, your rate controller adjusts the speed of the pump to maintain that rate. So every time you speed up, your total rate goes up, which means your pressure also has to go up, because that spray has to exit the nozzle. So in order to do that with an increased rate, you need increased pressure. Or every time you slow down, your total flow rate drops, which means your pressure also drops. And the reason why this actually matters is because every time your droplet size changes, or every time your pressure changes, your droplet size will change. So every time your rate goes up, your pressure goes up, your droplet size gets smaller. Or every time your rate goes down, your pressure goes down, and your droplet size gets bigger. So every time you change travel speed in your field, either speeding up or slowing down, your rate changes, which drives a change in pressure, which also drives a change in droplet size. So what does this look like? So this is a test we conducted here a couple summers ago. We've got Andrew and Corey out. We put out spray cards, and we sprayed across them. So the rate stayed the same. The boom height stayed the same. We had no wind that day. The only thing that varied was pressure. So we crossed these cards at 20, 40, 60 PSI, along with some other ones in the middle. I just showed these three for an example. And then we were able to go in and analyze those spray cards and say, what is our medium or mean droplet size? And we can conclusively say that every time your pressure changes, your droplet change. In fact, with these three cards, if you look at 20, 40, 60, you can visually see that the coverage is different. The droplet size got smaller as the pressure went up. And I know that there's nozzles out there that help reduce this problem if you start thinking about air induction type nozzles. But even with those, the droplet size does change as your pressure changes. So I thought, we've been thinking through it, like how do we really show this? And I think the best way to do it is actually to do a demo for you guys. So we're actually going to spray with this Deere sprayer we've got. We're running off some auxiliary hydraulics out back so we don't have to fire up the engine. And we did get the Cobra cleaned out, so we've got straight water in here so you don't have to worry about that. And so for this example, we're going to target a nominal speed of 10 mile an hour. So when I personally spray in standing crop, 10 mile an hour is about where I end up running. We've picked a rate of 17 gallons per acre, and we want a medium droplet. So I've actually already looked at the Wilger chart for you, and I've selected an ER 110-06 tip. So if we look at that chart, we can achieve our gallons per acre at our rate. At about 45 PSI, we'll have a medium droplet. So Jordan's going to go ahead and fire it up here, and we'll show you this. So right, 10 mile an hour, 17 gallons per acre, medium droplet. That's what we want. So we got the spray here, and then we're going to cut over to, this is a tool we use internally for development purposes, just so you can see the parameters. So our top line on there, top graph, is speed. You can see we're right at 10 mile an hour. Our next line down is our total flow in gallons per minute. And then the third box down is our spray pressure. So you can see we're sitting right about 45 PSI as we're traveling 10 mile an hour. So we are spraying what we intended to spray. We have that medium droplet based on that chart. But what happens as I'm out in the middle of that field and I've got a washout out there, and so I slow down. So my speed decreases and I go down to 7 mile an hour. We see our total gallons per minute drop because we slowed down. And what did our pressure do? We went from about 50 PSI, we're now at about 25 PSI or 20 PSI. And suddenly that medium droplet is coarse. We are no longer performing or putting the droplet size down that we intended to when we entered this field. And we only slowed down 3 mile an hour. What happens too, as I come up out of that washout and I've got a quarter mile of just smooth flat running, and I just keep pushing that hydrostat forward. We see our speed going up. We see our total flow rate go up in gallons per minute. We're now sitting at about 13 mile an hour. And what does our pressure do? Our pressure went from 25 PSI to about 80 PSI. And suddenly that coarse droplet is now a pretty fine droplet. I don't know if you guys can feel it, but I can actually feel the mist coming off, hitting my back now. And so if we're going this fast, we better hope that we don't have any wind or the neighbor has a susceptible crop, because I don't know where that fine droplet's ending up. And all I did was vary my speed 3 mile an hour from my target. I went from 7, I had a coarse droplet, 10, I had a medium droplet, and at 13, I've got a fine droplet. So you can go ahead and shut it down, Jordan. Think about that. How many of you guys drive one speed throughout your entire sprayer pass? So we actually had a number of sprayers here last year outfitted where we were able to monitor their travel speeds as they sprayed. So this is a field locally here in central Illinois, rectangular shape, relatively flat. It's got a single waterway at the south end. Here's a map of his speed. I also took those speeds and kind of chunked them up into a histogram chart so you could see what percent of time he was traveling at these various speeds. And 10% of the time he was in that 4 to 8 mile an hour range, 40% 8.5 to 10, and 50% was that 11 to 13. So in this field, his speed varied from about 7 to 13 mile an hour. If we look at that in terms of pressure, 15% of the time, he had a pressure down in the low 20s, coarse droplet. And probably what's more important to focus on is that green band, 50% of the time. So 50% of the time, he was within 5 PSI of target pressure, which means that 50% of the time, he was sitting in the droplet size that he was targeting. But that also means that 50% of the time, he was spraying a droplet size that he didn't intend to when he entered that field. So how does Symphony help solve this problem? With Symphony now, we have control over 2 aspects of spraying. We have control of the pump, and we have control of the nozzle. So now on your 2020, you will set both a target rate in gallons per acre, as well as a target spray pressure in PSI. We will then control the pressure with the pump, and we will control the rate using the nozzle. So you now have control over rate and pressure independently of each other with the Symphony system. So how does this work? One thing to remember is if you have a PWM nozzle system like Symphony, the first thing you need to do is to increase the size of your nozzle by 30 to 40%. So that's what Andrew and Dylan are going to do right now. They're going to swap out our 06 nozzles that we were just spraying with over to an 08 nozzle. And why do we do that? Why do we need an oversized nozzle for Symphony? And the reason is because we now have the ability with the solenoid to restrict or reduce the flow through that nozzle. So if you look at the cutaway, we've got the small red device right in the middle. That's a poppet. And that poppet has the ability to open and close at a very rapid rate and reduce the flow. So if we think about our 08 nozzle, if we reduce the flow by 30%, that 08 nozzle will perform like an 06 nozzle. Or if we take that 08 nozzle and reduce the flow by 50%, that 08 nozzle now acts like an 04. So by oversizing the nozzle, coupling it with a Symphony solenoid, we now have the ability to make that oversized nozzle perform the same as that whole suite of nozzles that are smaller than itself. So an 08 nozzle can now perform like an 06, an 05, an 04, all the way down to an 03 nozzle. So like before, I think the easiest way for you guys to understand this is to actually see it work. And so we're going to set up the same example as before. The difference now is we've switched out to our 08 nozzle, and Jordan is going to activate the Symphony control system. So we're still going to target 10 mile an hour. We're still going to target 17 gallons per acre. But now, because we have Symphony, we look at the chart and we say, where is our medium droplet? If I go right in the middle of that range, it's at 60 PSI. So Jordan's actually setting the pressure to 60 PSI, and he's going to go ahead and fire up the sprayer. So now we've got Symphony enabled. We've got our gallons per acre at 17 set. We've also set our pressure at 60 PSI. So we've got it running. We'll cut back over to that screen. So once again, we've got our four boxes here. We've got our speed, we've got our flow in GPM, then we have our pressure. So if you look at that, we're right at 60 PSI. The fourth box down, which we didn't touch on before, is duty cycle. So this is the percent of time that nozzle is actually spraying. So in this case, we're at about 75%. So we've taken that 08 nozzle, we've reduced the flow through it by 25%, which makes that 08 nozzle perform fairly similar to an 06 nozzle. So we're able to have a medium droplet at 60 PSI at our target rate and speed. So what happens as I approach that same washout in my field and I slow down to 7 mile an hour? So we see our speed go down, we see our GPM goes down because we slowed down, but what does our pressure do? Our pressure is still 60 PSI. But what did change? It was our duty cycle. So now our duty cycle is about 50%. So now that 08 nozzle, we've reduced the flow through it by 50%. So that 08 nozzle is performing the same as an 04 nozzle. So now with a single nozzle, with the ability to control the flow through it with a solenoid, we can get it to perform like that 04 nozzle. So let's also look at, I come up out of that washout and I just push that hydrostat forward and I'm going 13 mile an hour. You know, what do we see? So we see our speed go up, we see our total flow rate go up, we see our pressure is still 60 PSI. But look at our duty cycle. Our duty cycle is now 95%. So what does that mean? It means now that we're utilizing the full capability of that 08 nozzle. So at 13 mile an hour, we only had to reduce the flow by 5%. At 10 mile an hour, we reduced the flow by 25%. And at 7 mile an hour, we reduced the flow by 50%. So now with one nozzle, with a solenoid, we could achieve a consistent pressure across our full speed range. You can go ahead and shut it down, Jordan. So if you contrast that with our first example, where we went from 7 to 10 to 13 mile an hour, our pressure went from 25 to 50 to 75 PSI. And that's because we had a fixed orifice. All of that flow had to go through a fixed size nozzle. But now with Symphony, we can vary the flow through that oversized nozzle and achieve a consistent flow rate. You know, because we have the ability with the 2020 to control flow at the nozzle, we can solve turn compensation because we now can decrease the flow on the inside, increase it on the outside. We have control over that nozzle at the solenoid at the nozzle, so now swath becomes nozzle by nozzle. And we have the ability to control the flow through that nozzle, so now as you vary speed through the field, you know, we can correct for that and maintain a consistent pressure, which provides you with a consistent droplet size throughout your field. You know, the one thing that we haven't really touched on is we have the ability to actually control the rate on a nozzle by nozzle basis. So we can have some nozzles, much like turn compensation, increase their rate and others decrease their rate through your field. And Jason is actually going to be up now to talk about why this is important as we think about the future of spraying.
Hey, thanks, Luke. All right, the 4 R's. Who's heard of the 4 R's? Raise your hand if you've heard them. Yep, quite a few hands. You know, I think we always say people who come to conference, the best of the best farmers, right? So you guys know the 4 R's. The right source, the right rate, the right time, placed in the right way. They're the foundation of every good nutrient management program, which is what you heard about earlier, right? Earlier in the day with Corey and Matt. they're also the foundation of how we actually optimize our herbicide programs. And I don't think we think about that from a herbicide program perspective. Yeah, we're focused on our nitrogen, getting the rate right, placed in the right way with banded, but we don't think about that for herbicide. We just run 17 gallons an acre and we're off and running. You know, in a lot of ways, what Luke talked about is 2 of those 4 R's and how Symphony really addresses those, right? The right rate across your spray boom. Like, not just as you're heading straight down the field, but around curves or around waterways. Placement, what matters from a placement perspective is droplet size, getting the coverage that we need. That's about placing that active ingredient where it needs to be. So I'm going to take it a level deeper. We're going to talk about how we're applying technology to step into that a little bit further. Let's think about the label. So this is page 1 of the 29-page label for Liberty Contact Herbicide. I'm guessing those of you that spray Liberty, if I were to ask for a raise of hands and say, who has read all 29 pages? Not seeing any hands for those of you that have, right? Most of us, we read just enough to know the rate that we need to apply and to make sure we got the tip that we need. When we think about rate, there's 2 rates that we know about when we think about a herbicide. Carrier volume, that's spray volume, that's how much water we're putting down. And active ingredient, that's how much product in terms of ounces per acre. So for Liberty, I'm guessing a really common rate for most of you that apply Liberty might be 17 gallons an acre, totally within the label, within the range, somewhere in the middle. 36 ounces an acre might be pretty common in terms of how much product we actually apply. If our knowledge is just there, right, that's where we're at for most of us, saying, yeah, that's within label, I'm good to go. And the first line of what the Liberty label says for spray volume, actually that's true, right? It says 15 gallons an acre minimum, so I can feel good about applying 17 gallons an acre. But look at what the label actually says. What it says is, if dense canopy, large weeds, or unfavorable growing conditions are present, we need to increase that water volume to a minimum of 20 gallons an acre. So yep, 17 gallons an acre on average is the right answer, but the reality is nothing about our fields are consistent in that way. We need to be applying 15 gallons an acre for most of the field. It's going to be more than sufficient. But the portion of the field where I have weed canopies that overlap, or maybe my weeds are a little bit larger, I need to be applying 22 or 25 to get the effective control that chemistry for Liberty actually offers me. Let's take a look at active ingredient, 32 to 43 fluid ounces an acre, right? Depending on the what? Weed species, weed size, and the density per the weed chart. So 34, 35, absolutely on average, I can feel good about that. But it's the wrong answer for the entire field because some of the field needs 32 ounces, and yet there's others that really needs maybe 40 or 43. We need to start thinking about our herbicide programs not at a whole farm level, but at an individual weed level. Because nothing about weeds is consistent. They germinate inconsistently. They emerge non-uniformly. Their size and their densities are totally dependent on those emergence timings, right? The right answer based on our labels is not one average 17 gallons an acre and call it good. It's actually a totally different answer depending on which weed we're actually spraying. So sure, 15 gallons an acre on the left, more than sufficient to get the coverage I need, but right next to it, I've got 2 weeds that are overlapping their leaves. I don't have the surface contact to be able to get the coverage that Liberty Contact Herbicide offers me. And I don't think we correctly blame our weed escapes on what the real problems are. I think we totally miss a lot of that. The only way to solve this problem is to be able to actually measure it the day we spray. Because nothing about weeds do we have knowledge of until the day we spray. We don't know where they're at. We don't know their size, certainly, or their density until that sprayer pass goes through it. So that's where we're headed with vision technology. You know, Justin McMenemy talked about how we're taking that vision technology, right? We're using it to know, hey, this is where the row is, here's where I'm at, and to be able to adjust off of that to address machine performance in that way. But we're taking our same vision technology and we're applying it in a much greater way. Every aspect about our crop and our field, we will now have knowledge of the day we spray. You guys just came from hearing Tristan Herman talk about how even staying in emergence, being able to score the plants, right, from a crop perspective. It doesn't stop there. It continues on into being able to accurately measure the size, the density, and the location of our weeds as we're spraying. This project's been going for years now, and we've had prototype vision modules on sprayers, many different sprayers across thousands of acres. So what you do is you develop, those vision modules that are running, they're collecting images or data sets. That feeds our software development team to be able to take those data sets and actually develop software that can train or identify the features or characteristics that we're developing. You know, I continue to be blown away by the talent that exists here at Precision. I am honored to be a part of this incredible team. You're seeing Mike Sterned here. He's one of our best software engineers, and he's involved in this project. So this fall, we wanted to get together, and we wanted the actual team that's developing this technology, we said, hey, can we actually give them a chance to speak to you at Winter Conference about the technology that we're developing, how we're approaching it, and the thought process in terms of the opportunity that exists. So I'm going to play this video. This is them telling the story of really where we're headed and why we're doing what we're doing.
With vision technology on equipment on the farm, it's going to make things a lot easier when it comes to protecting our crop and making sure that we're aware of all the challenges that are coming at us during the season. We'll be able to evaluate things like nutrients and disease and weeds in our fields. And not only will we be able to evaluate that weed pressure, but we can control the machine and make sure that we spray adequate amounts in the right spot. And ultimately, all of this is going to significantly improve our ability to protect the crop and protect the yield potential that we started the season with.
We're working to develop a product that delivers actionable insights as they're occurring. Instead of just logging data to be analyzed later, we're looking to actually create insights as they're happening.
So computer vision is taking a camera and then taking the data captured by that camera, the image, and inputting that to a computer that can process that.
When you take an image, you're actually taking in millions of pieces of information about the environment. If we can take a camera system and we can deploy that on your ag equipment as you're driving through the field, and we can teach the computers behind that camera system to analyze the imagery in the same way that the human brain would, where you're looking at the plants and you're deciding these plants look healthy, these don't, these are the steps I need to take to improve, the potential yield of these plants. If we can train a model to produce those insights as well, then we can scale your ability to produce those conclusions across all of the acres that you farm.
The vision products that I see us developing here, I see them having a direct impact on my family's farm. And between data layers, getting that sprayer pass done more efficiently, improving the ease of my brother as he operates the sprayer, I just see huge impacts on that, and all while potentially saving costs through the long run.
Precision planting has a long history of finding and solving your problems, and this is another step towards using the latest technology to find more problems and help you solve them.
It's a difficult task to take an image and actually develop software that can identify characteristics about that image in itself. The photo on the left that you see, that's a bare ground with some weeds. So the first level for a photo like that is just to say, or an image, is to say green pixel versus brown. Is there a difference? Yes, right? Or no, there's not. If we think about our post passes though, think about this. What about a small soybean plant like this? It looks really similar to a weed or maybe a sugar beet plant or a cotton plant. What we do with our brains is we take those thousands and thousands of tiny differences that distinguish a small soybean plant from a weed, and we've trained ourselves to know, yes, this is a crop, this is a weed. That's what we're doing with our software that's running on these vision modules. So if we think about this, I actually want to come back a minute and I want to talk about that at one level further. Let's come over to this portion of the stage. Okay, so take a look at this stage. We've got vision modules across the sprayer itself. We've set up this portion of the stage as a simulated field. So I think a pretty good stand for January, we might say, right? We do have some weed pressure that I'm not excited about. We're going to go ahead and turn on now the video feed from Vision Module 3, okay? So you're seeing here on the screen exactly what that Vision module is seeing, okay? So as it's looking ahead, it's looking at the field, you're actually seeing that live as we speak. That Vision module is running software, though. It's not just taking an image and sending it up to a cloud. It's actually running the software that's detecting what it is. Is this a corn plant? Is this a weed? So let's go ahead and turn on the inference layer. So what happens, right? The software is actually detecting real time, many times a second. In green, it's saying green is a corn plant, red's a weed. So it's identifying that real time, many times a second as we're spraying our fields. Okay. As we think about, doing this on a stage, you might say, sure, great. This works well on the stage. What about in the field? How about at 15 mile an hour? How about in my field, on my sprayer? Those conditions aren't the same as here today on the sprayer. This past fall, we set a goal. Could we be at a point where our vision software could be running real time on the sprayer? And so we set up a field. We actually call it Shop 50. This is the rogator in that location. We've got 10 vision modules across the sprayer. We actually broke that field in half, and we set part of it for soybeans, part of it for corn, and we staggered the planting date. So you're seeing the photo on the left is about when we did the test. So you see corn's at about a V3, V4 plant stage, and there's some weed pressure in that field. So take a look at this, guys. This is the weed pressure map that came from the vision modules real time as they're measuring that weed pressure. 0% is green. That means no weed pressure present. Red, that means a lot of weeds. We had significant weed pressure. Take a look at this spot in the field. This is a waterway, so we weren't applying herbicide for this pass, so we did not outline the waterway. We sprayed right through it. Our machine learning and computer vision software isn't just detecting the difference between a green pixel and a brown pixel. It's separating out the difference between corn and weeds. But it's doing more than that. It's actually being able to separate the difference between a broadleaf weed and a grass weed. So in this case, the overall weed pressure is capturing that waterway in that weed map. But let me switch over to the grass weed pressure map. Here's what happens. It goes green, right? Because this field had basically no broadleaf pressure or grass pressure except for that waterway, and that shows up as a bright red. Corey and I actually went out to the field after the team had done this check and had done this test, and we wanted to do some scouting to do some verification. So spot checks 1 through 6 are locations that we walked to and dropped a pin to measure or verify the performance of our vision system. So here's spot check 6. This is a green area. This is a low weed pressure zone. He's smiling, right? There's no weeds to be found in that location. This is spot check 3 where he's kneeling in that location, and you can see a few weeds. And here's spot check 1. This is him kneeling in that high weed pressure zone, and he put a flag there to mark red to verify the performance when he took the photo. You know, planar maps like downforce have taught us a lot over the last decade about our fields. I think weed pressure for sprayers is going to be really similar. We're going to now have a multi-year record of where our weed zones are at and how effective we are with our herbicide program. So now, This fall or winter, when I walk into my ag chem retailer and I have the conversation about next year, I can have that multi-year record to know how effective is my herbicide program. And it's not just at a farm level. This is at a field level. This is at a zone level. I can start to make decisions based off of actual real data instead of just blanket decisions before the season's even started. You know, it's useful though, as maps are outside of the cab. I think what we can do with it in the cab is going to be even more powerful. You know, picture your weed density, having a weed density metric on your 2020. If that goes yellow or maybe red, I can manually bump up my rate. I can start to do a better job at actually following the label for those portions of the field where I need that higher rate. In a lot of ways, having the ability to have vision modules and 2020 for monitoring, it's like having a few load pins in your planter, right? I can manually adjust the bag pressure, or back in the day, my spring settings. The game totally changed, though, on the planter when we went to Delta Force, right? Load pins across the planter, being able to automatically, row by row, adjust our downforce. And that's where we're headed with our vision technology. So everything that Luke talked about for the first 20 minutes of this session, Symphony nozzle control, has been intentionally designed exactly in parallel with what we're doing with our vision technology. So our Symphony nozzle control on its own can fundamentally change the game when it comes back to how we think about rate control. And vision modules being able to monitor is going to give us a step in the right direction. But when we tie it together, that's when it gets really exciting, right? We start to intelligently spray off of what our vision modules are actually seeing in the cab. There's two opportunities that we see for precision planting vision technology integrated into Symphony nozzle control. The first, automatically controlling the rate based on your weed density. So that label that I described earlier, I can plug in 17 gallons an acre for a minimum, I can plug 22 for a max, and I can let my Symphony system automatically adjust the rate based on what the label actually specifies I need for effective control of liberty. If I get into a portion of the field where I've got weeds that are canopying or they're a little bit larger, my rate can go up where it needs to be. But on average, I can keep my rate at 17 or maybe 18 gallons an acre for most of the field. It's the best of both worlds, but it's going to take technology like this to be able to do it. The second opportunity is targeted spraying or spot spraying of your contact herbicide. It's going to totally make sense for our fall burn down pass where we've got some contact herbicide on it. For a fraction of the cost, we can come in and hit it. Or maybe I can add a second post pass that I've been on the fence with. I'm not sure if I want to go. I know that second flush of weeds came. What do I do about it? Do I head out and walk it? Do I ignore it? Or do I blanket apply? Now we can, for a fraction of the cost, actually do something about it. So we want to demonstrate kind of the spot spraying functionality that we've intentionally designed into Symphony and the vision modules for you today. So we've set the sprayer up, I mentioned earlier, into sections. Half of the sprayer, the vision modules are running in monitor-only function. These other half, though, they're actually tied in to Symphony as an integrated system, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and, I asked this question before. I know there's at least 3 that are not from Illinois in the back there. Who else is not from Illinois? Raise your hand. So this is the new state flower, the water hemp for Illinois. In case you didn't know, it's been determined, unfortunately, and I've got a corn plant here. So I'm going to go ahead and set over here, I'm going to set a corn plant, and I'm going to set a weed, and we're going to go ahead and turn on the Symphony nozzle control system. So what happens, right? The vision modules are monitoring, and they're actually detecting where is a weed, where is a plant, and what sort of plant is it. So as you can tell, they're spraying by the water hemp. So now I take a little small morning glory, right? I'll go ahead and set him over here. Let's see what happens. So he comes on. So again, it's not just detecting a green pixel or brown pixel. We're taking information, and that machine vision software is actually applying that to be able to say, absolutely, there's a corn plant there. but absolutely there is also a 1-inch morning glory that it's detecting and saying, nope, we're spraying, right? This isn't just a corn plant, we're hitting it. Okay, go ahead and turn it off. Thank you. So those of you that spray probably have a question that you would like to ask. I'm guessing that your question after this is, what about my residual? My residual is too important to me to just throw away because I want to do spot spraying, because this looks like cool technology. I know I can apply it for a fall pass, which is just contact only. I know I can now be able to hit a second post, but what about my residual? From the beginning of these projects, the Symphony nozzle control product development, the vision technology development, we've been thoughtful about that. In fact, we have a whole third team that is working on solving exactly that problem. The ability to spot spray and take advantage of the significant input savings that are going to be there, to be able to take our contact herbicide in variable rate based on the weed density that's present, but to also in that same pass be applying a blanket residual when I need to, and to be able to do that pre and post pass with both of those. Sense, monitor, control. Over the last decade, you have seen at Precision Planting, we start with shining the flashlight, and we start by developing control technologies that actually drive increased profitability, like Justin talked about, and increase farm revenues as a whole. When you tie those together, the value of precision ag technology just explodes. That's where we're headed, to have vision technology that can absolutely, as a retrofit system, be added to your sprayer that's in your shed. There's no need to buy a new sprayer because this iron, right, is just as good. But I can add now vision technology to be able to monitor. I can add nozzle control to do a better job at a rate, and they can tie together. And now I can start to intelligently spray, drive input savings, and actually follow the labels and the effective control that those chemistry offers. So thanks for your time. Appreciate your attendance.